Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. In late 1999, a yacht named Albatross set sail from the southern coast of Argentina toward the Pacific Ocean, leading to one of the most horrifying losses in maritime history. The crew, composed of young and experienced sailors, had a clear goal: to sail from Argentina's bay to Australia, cross the ocean, and then venture toward tropical islands in the South Pacific. Initially, the ship and its crew were hopeful and excited. However, after a few weeks, Albatross and its crew suddenly disappeared. After conducting a final security check along the southern Argentine coast, Albatross sent out standard reports indicating everything was going smoothly for several days. However, after that final report, no further communication was received. At first, there was very little information about the missing yacht. The traces of the ship, which had disappeared into the depths of the ocean, would become a part of the stories of the few crew members who survived for just a few weeks. A week after the crew went missing, local fishing boats began issuing warnings about dangerous weather conditions and large waves. No trace of the yacht could be found. In the first few weeks, the search efforts yielded no solid evidence of the yacht's whereabouts. One of the challenges the rescue teams faced was the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean and the height of the waves. When the yacht disappeared, the sea conditions were incredibly bad, with waves rapidly rising and the ocean was becoming increasingly difficult every day. The weather posed significant dangers for local fishermen and rescue teams, which led to the failure of the initial search efforts following the yacht's disappearance. The Argentine government organized the search operation. At first, it was nearly impossible to trace the yacht, which had left no visible marks on the ocean's surface. Trying to find any sign of the yacht in the vast expanse of the ocean was a daunting task. The rescue operation only became serious 3 weeks after the yacht's disappearance. However, by that time, the survival struggle of the crew was assumed to have become much more difficult. When a yacht goes missing in the ocean, the first few hours are considered critical for survival. As time passed, the crew's chances of survival drastically decreased. Meanwhile, some small fishing boats began their own search efforts after hearing rumors about the missing yacht. Unfortunately, these attempts were also unsuccessful. As time went on, maritime authorities trying to gather more information about the missing yacht struggled to make any precise estimations about the area where the yacht could be. Secrecy and uncertainty became the most crucial factors in determining the fate of the missing yacht. The crew's families received no information for a long time. For several weeks after the yacht disappeared, rescue teams failed to find any sign of the crew, leading to a sense of hopelessness. Knowing that the chances of survival were diminishing in the ocean, the families of the missing crew members began to realize how tragic this event could be. At the time, this disappearance was considered a reality nightmare in the world of maritime affairs. Not just an accident, but also a symbol of great uncertainty. Despite ongoing efforts by the rescue teams, locating the missing yacht seemed impossible. As weeks passed since the yacht's disappearance, the hope of the crew surviving grew increasingly faint. However, no one could provide a definitive answer on how a ship lost in the ocean could eventually surface. The yacht was gone, but the traces it left behind would mark the beginning of a story that would be etched into history. Several weeks after the yacht's disappearance, rescue teams began to do everything they could to understand the scale of the incident. Meanwhile, the crew of the Albatross, lost in the ocean's vastness, fought an even harder battle for survival. Struggling to survive on the thin line between life and death, their fight would come at a great cost. At first, the missing yacht's crew remained optimistic, believing that the rescue teams would find them. However, after a few days adrift in the middle of the ocean, the Albatross crew began to realize the grim reality of their situation. The yacht, drifting in the ocean, sustained severe damage. As the yacht drifted, it sustained significant damage, and many critical pieces of equipment were destroyed. There was no food or drinking water on board, and drinking seawater was extremely dangerous for survival. With each passing day, survival became more and more difficult. As the crew's hope began to fade, some members found it increasingly hard to endure. Their psychological breakdowns were weakening both their bodies and spirits. In the early days, they still held on to hope for a rescue, but as time passed and everything began to collapse, the feeling that the missing yacht was truly lost grew stronger. The crew came together to try to develop strategies for survival. These strategies aimed to increase the chances of survival for the group, who were forced to drift in the ocean for days. However, the challenges, due to unpredictable conditions, became more complex with each passing day. The yacht had been drifting for some time, and areas where water was seeping into the ship and the serious food shortages became evident. Initially, the crew used waterproof sail pieces to build makeshift shelters in order to stay afloat. After being adrift for a long time, due to being stuck in the middle of the sea, they tried implementing difficult survival tactics like fishing from the ocean. However, the sea was not generous to them most of the time. The dark and menacing waters of the ocean constantly placed them in more difficult situations. With each passing day, the crew's physical endurance began to wear down. The lack of food, water, and sleep became the fundamental obstacles in their fight for survival. Since there was not enough food on the yacht, the crew initially attempted to catch small amounts of fish, but this proved to be of little benefit. The food sources in the sea were limited, and soon fishing became almost impossible. Dehydration placed tremendous pressure on the crew's bodies. Within just a few days, the extreme heat and the ocean's salty water made dehydration even more unbearable. Since there was no fresh water to drink, seawater became the only option. However, this had a toxic effect on their bodies. The inability of the body to process the salty water rapidly led to dehydration, further weakening the crew. Beyond these physical challenges, the crew's psychological state also deteriorated seriously. Lack of sleep, thirst, food shortages, and loneliness in the middle of the ocean were trauma-inducing factors affecting the sailors in the group. Their perception of reality became distorted, and they began to feel like time was slipping away like a ghost. The crew of the missing yacht was increasingly feeling helpless in the face of the vastness of the ocean. While the crew of the missing yacht struggled to survive, they were constantly immersed in a sense of inner collapse and hopelessness. Many kept fighting for survival, but others had become too exhausted to give it their all. Psychologically, searching for an escape in the middle of the ocean had become a deeply affecting experience for them. Especially the lack of food and water had significantly lowered the group's morale. Unknowingly, those trying to survive began to question their mutual cooperation. Some even attempted to risk others' lives in order to survive. However, their physically depleted bodies unfortunately lacked the strength needed to survive. By the end of this chapter, most of the yacht's crew would not survive, but 2 individuals would manage to stay alive until the very end. Many physical and psychological barriers would eventually limit survival to just these 2. The harsh survival struggle in the ocean would test the limits of the human spirit and remain an unforgettable experience for the survivors, who would carry the trauma with them for many years after returning. Several weeks after the yacht's disappearance, an international search operation was launched. The Argentine government, in collaboration with neighboring countries, began a series of rescue missions to reach the depths of the ocean and locate the missing ship and crew. However, the ocean's vastness and uncertainty made the search efforts even more difficult with each passing day. As the crew's hope of survival dwindled, the rescue teams struggled to trace the lost yacht's whereabouts. Initially, there was hope for finding the lost yacht. The search operations generated great excitement when the first traces of the missing ship appeared in the middle of the ocean. A large-scale search on the ocean's surface was initiated to narrow down the area where the missing ship was located and to find traces of the crew. Many ships, underwater devices, and aerial vehicles were employed in the search for the missing vessel. The rescue teams attempted to analyze the ocean currents and weather conditions in the area where the Albatross had disappeared. However, like many oceanic research operations, these efforts faced significant challenges. The search area was so vast that finding any trace of the lost yacht was nearly impossible. The ocean was a place where many ships had vanished without leaving a trace, and the area where the Albatross had disappeared was no different. Before the search began, maritime experts and scientists analyzed the area where the Albatross had gone missing. This area was one of the deepest and widest parts of the ocean. The ocean not only posed obstacles due to its size, but also due to harsh weather conditions and massive waves. When the Albatross went missing, the weather in the region was extremely poor. Sudden storms and variable winds disrupted the efforts of the search teams. The currents made it even more difficult to trace the missing vessel. The ocean, in every way, complicated the rescue efforts. Additionally, conducting searches in the middle of the ocean relied heavily on visual traces. However, in the vastness of the ocean, aerial surveillance by planes or helicopters was unfortunately not very successful. The immense size of the search area made it nearly impossible to find even the smallest trace of the yacht. The only clues that the rescue teams had initially were the last known position of the missing ship and meteorological reports from the region. Scanning a large area and finding a missing ship in the middle of the ocean was one of the greatest challenges faced. In the maritime world, many search vessels were equipped with modern underwater radars and sonar systems, but even these systems could not fully trace the lost ship's position in the depths of the sea. Moreover, underwater searches led to physical exhaustion and coordination issues within the teams. During the search, some teams struggled to revisit the area where the yacht had gone missing, and operations were halted several times due to the weather conditions. Many times, surface searches of the ocean ended without finding any trace of the missing yacht and its crew. As a result, these extensive search operations further widened the gaps in the search area. The teams hoped to find a part of the missing ship or any trace of the crew, but they were destined for great disappointment. The search operations began with a certain degree of hope, but over time, that hope began to fade. Tracking the missing ship in the ocean became an obstacle that slowed and prolonged the operations. Intense search efforts over the course of several weeks had brought the maritime teams to the brink of exhaustion. Finding the traces of the missing Albatross yacht had become akin to searching for a needle in a haystack. Over time, the search operations, which failed to find any concrete information about the missing ship, generated a strong sense of loss among the public. However, the efforts of the rescue teams, despite the difficult conditions, remained a valuable opportunity to save the lives of the lost Albatross crew. The majority of the search operations ended without finding any trace of the missing yacht. However, another critical moment for the lost crew had begun. The obstacles faced by the rescue teams reduced the hope for the missing ship with each passing day. While the fate of the yacht that had vanished in the ocean remained uncertain, the efforts of the rescue teams had only deepened the impact of this loss. After the yacht's disappearance, most of the crew, facing the ocean's massive waves and harsh conditions, lost their struggle for survival. Insufficient food and water, extreme weather conditions, and depleted endurance further deteriorated the crew's weakened physical and psychological health. In the ocean, with each passing day, survival became more difficult, and eventually, only 2 people managed to stay alive. However, for these 2 survivors, life in the middle of the ocean was not only a physical struggle, but also a profound psychological battle. The surviving crew members initially did not lose hope of survival. For several days, the crew of the missing yacht tried to survive by sharing every small piece of food and water they found on board. However, as time passed, everything became more difficult in the depths of the ocean. The yacht had been damaged, communication systems were broken, and food supplies had run out. The crew's need for water became impossible to meet as the ocean water was too salty to drink. As days went by, the depletion of food and water resources made it increasingly difficult to keep morale high. Trust in one another played a critical role in their survival efforts. However, this trust struggled to balance out the physical exhaustion and the loss of hope over time. Initially, there was hope for rescue in the middle of the sea, but with each passing day, that hope diminished, giving way to the weakening wills of the survivors. One of the most important elements of surviving in the ocean was the ability to use the surrounding resources properly and to plan survival strategies. However, most of the crew had been too late to implement these strategies. When the 2 survivors realized how little resources they had left, they began to act more cautiously and with greater planning. Initially, they had tried to catch fish from the sea, but most of the fish had moved away from the area. Water could only be obtained from the salty ocean waters, with no other sources available. After a while, the 2 survivors tried to create A water droplet collector system, by using parts from the old yacht in an attempt to find a way to collect water. However, this system only allowed them to gather a very limited amount of water. With food and water resources running out, every passing day became a fight for survival, even if it felt like a descent into darkness. Physical exhaustion and dehydration weakened the bodies of the two survivors, while psychological pressure increased steadily. Being alone in the middle of the ocean for such a long time distorted their sense of time and deeply affected their mental states. Many had fallen into a kind of depression due to the vastness of the ocean. However, the two survivors continued to support each other to stay alive. Their survival process was not only a physical test, but also a mental one. Although their bodies were growing weaker, these two survivors had to fight not only against the natural environment, but also against their own minds in order to stay alive. Each day in the middle of the ocean further isolated them. From time to time, the trust they had in each other began to outweigh the power of their survival instincts. This solidarity gave them the opportunity to forget how physically weak they were. Over the time spent in the ocean, the two survivors did not just push their physical limits. They also underwent significant changes in their inner worlds. Dehydration, food scarcity, and prolonged isolation had affected them not only physically, but also psychologically. The time they spent between life and death transformed them into different people. Many times it was not just the efforts needed to stay alive, but also the moments they spent thinking about their pasts and loved ones that played an important role. When these two survivors returned, they would face great difficulty in adapting to society with the trauma they had experienced. The time spent in the ocean would return like a nightmare, and every moment would change them forever. Once they had completed their physical recovery, the survivors would have to undergo a long rehabilitation process to cope with the psychological trauma they had endured. However, their story would remain as a reminder of the limits of survival at sea and the deep resilience of the human spirit. The lost crew of the Albatross yacht, in their brutal fight for survival in the middle of the ocean, demonstrated just how resilient the human soul can be. The two survivors, in an environment where they were face to face with death, not only succeeded in surviving, but also in resisting the deepest human instincts. However, the trauma and suffering they endured showed the cost of this struggle. The ocean, with its endless vastness, had tested their limits, but the two survivors, mentally still intact, proved how humans can endure even in their darkest moments. After weeks of desperate struggle and dwindling resources, the rescue teams finally came across traces of the lost Albatross yacht. The crew of the ship lost in the depths of the ocean, along with the two survivors, awaited their rescue with one final hope. However, this rescue process was not only the end of a physical struggle, but also the beginning of a profound transformation that would reshape the survivors' lives, their psychology, and their process of reintegrating into society. The rescue became a major event, not just for the crew and the rescue teams, but also for the global public. The arrival of the rescue teams at the lost yacht's location was a combination of sheer coincidence and meticulous work. Weeks of searching had been part of an international effort to locate a ship lost in the vastness of the sea. The operation, initiated with the support of the Argentine government, was expanded with the help of maritime experts, boats, aircraft, and helicopters from other countries. However, the size of the ocean made such an operation extraordinarily difficult. Many areas were inaccessible for precise scanning due to underwater currents and variable weather conditions. The geographical features of the area where the yacht had disappeared further complicated the search area. Yet the combination of technology and human effort eventually succeeded in finding the lost Albatross. The yacht had been abandoned in the middle of the deep ocean. Using sonar devices and shallow water scans, the rescue teams discovered a trace of the yacht's wreckage approximately a kilometer away. This was a turning point for the search team. When the rescue teams finally located the Albatross, the two surviving crew members had been worn down by months of survival struggles. Their mental and physical health had deteriorated, yet they had managed to stay alive. The long days at sea had taken an ever-increasing toll on them. The two survivors, while about to reap the reward of their fight for survival, were also faced with confronting the pain of losing their friends and fellow crew members. The moment of rescue was filled with complex emotions for the survivors. On one hand, it marked the end of the terrifying days spent in the ocean, while, on the other hand, they had to face the painful loss of their missing comrades. Though the survivors had been weakened by the challenges they faced at sea, they felt a deep sense of relief when the rescue teams reached them. However, the weakness in their bodies and the trauma they had endured left them with a past that they would never forget. For the rescue teams, the process was also filled with significant emotional and physical challenges. The rescue of the survivors came after a long and strenuous search effort. The obstacles the rescue teams encountered continually tested their resilience. Particularly, finding a lost ship in the deep ocean required a high level of technical expertise and coordination. Changing weather conditions, the speed of ocean, currents, and misdirected search points were some of the difficulties the teams faced. The cooperation of the teams played a critical role in the success of such a large-scale search operation. Rescue boats, aircraft, helicopters, and other maritime vehicles from various nations worked together in an extraordinarily organized manner. However, the area where the Albatross was located was very narrow, highlighting how meticulous and difficult the efforts of the teams were. After the rescue process, the 2 surviving crew members were treated in a hospital for 2 weeks. Physiologically, their bodies had been severely damaged due to prolonged dehydration and hunger. Psychologically, the trauma they had experienced during their time at sea meant that their mental recovery would take a long time. The rescued crew garnered the attention of journalists from all over the world, and their story echoed globally. The survival of the 2 individuals became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit and the resistance against the challenges of nature. However, this rescue also marked the beginning of mourning for the other crew members who had been lost and the acceptance of their losses. The rescue story not only changed the lives of the survivors, but also shed light on the tremendous efforts of the rescue teams and the collaboration involved in facing the challenges of the natural world. The story of the Albatross and its lost crew is not just a tale of a ship lost in the depths of the ocean. It is a profound testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of survival. The search and rescue operation, though incredibly challenging, proved once again the strength of human survival instincts. The finding of the Albatross was not just the conclusion of an oceanic search, but also a victory for human endurance and perseverance. While the survivors' physical recovery began, the psychological scars they carried would last a lifetime. The ordeal of the Albatross crew is much more than just a struggle for survival. It is a vivid demonstration of how the limits of the human body and mind can be pushed to their extreme. The weeks spent at sea tested not only their physical endurance, but also their psychological resilience. Hunger, dehydration, and the fight to stay alive took their toll on the crew. But the most profound effects were psychological. Mental exhaustion, despair, and isolation were among the many challenges they faced, laying the foundation for trauma that would have a long-lasting impact. The 2 survivors, despite their bond formed during their time at sea, drifted apart after their rescue. Their shared struggle for survival became an emotional burden that would shape their future lives. The time they spent on the Albatross was not just a physical battle. It was also a journey of self-confrontation and reconciliation. In the aftermath, both survivors sought psychological support, and although they began the process of healing, the effects of their ordeal would remain with them for years to come. Psychological trauma is a deep-seated pain that often remains unspoken, buried in the subconscious. After the Albatross went missing, the 2 survivors were forced to grow personally in the small world they inhabited. Survival for them became more than just a physical challenge. It became a journey of self-discovery, where they gained a deeper understanding of life and death. The ocean is both a physical and psychological force. Once lost in its vastness, the crew of the Albatross found themselves not only in a geographical void, but in an emotional and mental one as well. The vast ocean deepened their sense of isolation and made the passage of time feel much more profound. The ocean was not just an external obstacle, it was a mental labyrinth. The waves, the winds, the salty water, they were the tangible forces they fought against. but it was the internal effects of the ocean that were perhaps the most powerful. 2. Be lost in the endless expanse of water forces one to confront their very existence. For days, the crew of the Albatross realized that every wave, every gust of wind, and every sunset was a reminder of the transience of life. Time spent in the ocean became an internal journey. The ocean, in its infinity, tested them not only physically, but also spiritually. Its vastness was a reflection of the limited nature of human existence. Survival is not just about finding food, water, and shelter. It is about discovering one's inner strength, will, and resilience. The crew of the Albatross learned these lessons over the course of their harrowing ordeal. Survival is not determined by how physically strong one is, but by how mentally and emotionally resilient one can be. Each crew member tested their own limits and tried to push beyond them. In the end, their suffering became a lesson for the survivors and for the world. The cost of survival and pushing the boundaries of the human spirit is not only physical, it has deep psychological effects as well. This experience is a lesson for all of humanity. The ocean presents challenges and obstacles, but it also reveals the limits of our inner strength. The story of the Albatross reminds us that survival is not just about enduring the physical hardships of nature, but about confronting the depths of the human soul and discovering the unspoken reservoirs of strength we all carry within us. The struggle for survival is not just a battle with the external world, but also a confrontation with our inner selves. Even in the most challenging moments, the human survival instinct pushes individuals forward, but this process also brings them face to face with their darkest aspects. The disappearance of the Albatross and the subsequent investigations into the incident led to the development of new lessons and strategies for survival at sea. Surviving in the ocean is not only a battle for life, but also a symbol of human resilience against the immense power of nature. The psychological effects of prolonged maritime accidents and disappearances have prompted scientific research, contributing valuable insights into how those in similar situations can recover and heal. These events have also driven improvements in maritime safety standards, strengthening survival training systems, and enhancing search and rescue operations. Furthermore, the growing awareness of survival at sea has led to the development of more efficient maritime technologies and more effective psychological support services for survivors. The story of the Albatross crew, beyond the loss of a sailing vessel, represents humanity's perpetual struggle with nature, boundaries, and itself. It highlights not only the resilience, determination, and inner strength of the human spirit, but also underscores the vast and formidable challenges nature poses. The events serve as a profound lesson for humanity. Every hardship contains a lesson, and every loss carries meaning. The ocean is not just a geographical space, it is also a testing ground that touches the deepest corners of the human soul.